Let's unpack each of the customer types and explore some of the key factors and elements we'd have to think about that are critical to effectively meeting the needs of each customer type. We start with the sourcing side, which is customers that are sourcing food items from the business and doing their revenue contribution to the business via purchases, without whom there would be no business to speak of. We start with the main customer type, consumer, where we consider two types of customers: consumers that are sourcing food items in bulk for day-to-day consumption, as well as consumers that are sourcing items in large quantities, as inputs to the catering menu of events that, because of community psychographics and other important things such as cultural and traditional inclinations, are typically attended by a large number of people. We then move on to customers on the sourcing side that can be classified B2B. Here, we're dealing with firstly, caterers and event planners that serve different customers. These include corporate events such as year-end functions, team building functions, or annual financial results gatherings, to personal events, serving customers that fit the profile of the event catering consumers that have chosen to outsource catering to an external party. The second type of customer is hospitality establishments as well as restaurants. Hospitality establishments would typically source the type of food items on offer for catering purposes in their restaurants, be it sit-in or room service, so they fit the same customer profile as restaurants. The last type of customer under B2B on the sourcing side is localized food retailers. They are your typical corner store, mom and pop supermarkets, as well as what some might call spazza shops. They typically intimately know the needs of their communities and are the trusted go-to food retailer for emergency or urgent need buying, often with flexible quantities, as well as informal and flexible credit solutions. We then deal with customer types on the supply side, and in this case, we only have one B2B type customer on the supply side. We're getting our supply from small or smaller scale farmers and food producers. We pool their supply in order to fulfill pooled orders on the sourcing side, to satisfy demand coming from the 5 customer types on the sourcing side. Now there are a few things to consider, in terms of what it would take to meet the needs of each customer type. For bulk buying consumers, we need to know the prominent food items that are in demand in all of the regions we're targeting. Some of the demand for specific regions and areas might be because of community psychographics, religious, traditional, or culturally driven nuances. These nuances often dictate the kind of food staples that would typically be high in demand in communities of different profiles, especially considering that one region can contain multiple different areas, where each area is inhabited by a community with a different profile. For example, some communities mainly consume flour-based food items, and perhaps potatoes, legumes such as beans, and maybe even meat products, such as mutton, as food staples. Other types of communities may mainly consume maize meal, fibrous vegetables such as cabbage and spinach, and perhaps even meat products such as chicken and beef as their main food staples. One would also have to pay attention to purchasing behaviors of these communities, in relation to each of these food items, and understand which items these communities are likely to source in bulk. One would also have to consider psychographic or behavioral nuances, such as the purchase of bulk food items via savings clubs, where members of these savings clubs themselves pool their order to derive their own economies of scale benefit. It might be worthwhile for the business to encourage and incentivize such behaviors in communities where the base psychographics and resource pooling behaviors already exist, because that would not only result in even bigger orders for the business, but also result in even bigger economies of scale benefits for everyone included in the pooled order. A sort of localized pooling pod scheme, where community members are incentivized to order as part of a pooling pod for monthly or quarterly food staple sourcing. This would be beneficial because it could guarantee demand for supplier outputs, thus making it even more worthwhile for target suppliers to retail their goods via the food corner. Another key factor to consider is the demand patterns of the various food items across the different seasons of the year, for different regions and areas. There might be nuances in terms of items in high demand in a given season for different regions. It helps with planning on the supply side, because, for example, most people tend to prefer consuming oranges in winter, whereas in summer, they likely prefer them as a juice variation. So in winter, it would make more sense to pull supply of oranges from different orange farmers, whereas in summer, a planning exercise between orange and other fruit farmers, and smaller-scale organic, preservative-light, juice producers, might be worthwhile for everyone involved, in order to meet the anticipated demand. These seasonal demand patterns are a key consideration for consumers sourcing food items for events as well. Cultural, traditional, and religious events tend to happen at the same time of the year, and for some communities, there are specific food items that have to form part of the menu of the event. Mapping out these demand pattern variations across regions, areas, and community profiles is a key input to the process of correctly anticipating demand and preparing to meet that demand. Demand patterns are important because for the pooling endeavor to be successful, customers, individually and otherwise, have to effectively be ordering the same types of items in order to actually make the economies of scale benefits worthwhile. The main value proposition feature for these two consumer customer types is in fact economies of scale benefits, which boils down to competitive pricing of items in order to drive worthwhile cost savings for the customer. One has to then look at the pricing trends across the various food items and across various order sizes in order to ensure that the ultimate pricing to the consumer is actually competitive enough to result in notable, net cost savings for every order they make. Deciphering the list of prominent food items is also important for the B2B customer types. The list of prominent items for the event sourcing consumer customer type can easily form the base for the B2B event sourcing customer type caterers and event planners. The exercise for restaurants and hospitality establishments should be relatively easier. Restaurants, standalone or hospitality restaurants, tend to have set menus, unlike the consumer personal events that tend to pick up trends as different people in communities try to one-up each other's event. The 3-bean salad suddenly has apples in it, because some brave cook tried it to try to stand out and guests loved it, so suddenly 2 bags of apples for non-dessert purposes is suddenly a key feature in high-demand items for a given community, for a particular religious event, when this was not the case the year, month, or even week before. When pulling these orders, it's not just 2 unanticipated bags of green apples that have to go to a given area. Depending on the scale of the business, it could be hundreds to thousands of bags that are unanticipated in demand, that suddenly have to be sourced from smaller scale, capacity-limited, farmers. The polling of prominent items for restaurants and hospitality establishments, on the other hand, wouldn't likely be as ad hoc or on the fly. It's likely to be more straightforward and predictable. The same goes for seasonal demand patterns. Spend and order size data on this customer type front is also a key input. It's a bit more difficult on the caterer and event planner front, because each family is different, even if the community has the same income profile. There are too many nuances at play. 2 families with the same income profile wouldn't necessarily approach things the same way. No one knows the kind of coming-of-age event spending profile of a combination of a rich but very frugal father and competitive grandmother is going to produce. The same goes for a combination of a generous father and wicked stepmother, or the very showy and generous single mom, with a son who crashed her car the month before. The ease of determination of spend profiles of restaurants and hospitality establishments would serve as an anchor, demand pattern-wise, to sort of inject some level of much-needed predictability to the process. Typical spend and order size trends across restaurants and hospitality establishments, across different regions and areas, is also a key consideration, in order to assess things such as possible revenue that could be made from this particular customer type. Moving on to localized retailers, considerations are essentially the same as for the other items, although the scope of items would tend to be larger than for the other customer types. It's also important to consider margins across the board, from the margin the localized retailer expects to make, to the less commissions margin the supplier expects to make, as well as assessing any markup opportunities that might present themselves in the process. The resources and capabilities of the supplier are also a key consideration, and would determine which side of the equation the business has to spend more time and effort on at any point in time. High demand and a growing customer list is a good thing, but it could quickly become a challenge if the demand gets so high that the list of onboarded suppliers cannot meet the said demand, due to capacity and output limitations. In that scenario, more time and effort would then have to be spent on sourcing and onboarding more supply partners. It all boils down to balancing customer acquisition efforts with supplier onboarding business development activities to ensure that parties on both sides are happy. It's also important to bear in mind that cost savings shouldn't mean compromised quality. That's the fastest way to get customers running out the door.